Hi, and welcome to our movie about our trip to Boston and North Carolina's Outer Banks. I'm Emily.
And I'm Natalie.
And we'll be your hosts for this exciting flick.
Our trip began in Boston, and we spent a lot of time looking at old things.
Boston was a very important place when our country was fighting for its independence with Britain.
So we took Dad out to look at some of the landmarks and learn the stories behind them.
Here's the new State House. It isn't that new, though. It was built shortly after the Revolution, when they grew out of their old State House. It was one of the first stops along the Freedom Trail.
The Freedom Trail was a red pathway that led us through the city, showing us many important landmarks.
Our next stop was on Park Street Church, on Brimstone Corner. The nickname was given during the time the American hid gunpowder in the basement during the War of 1812.
Right next to the church is one of the most famous cemeteries in this country, the Granary Burial Ground. Paul Revere and John Hancock, James Otis, and Sam Adams are buried there, along with the victims from the Boston Massacre.
John Hancock had his right hand cut off by grape robbers who wanted his rings.
James Otis was one of the first men to claim that all people should have certain rights and freedoms. He inspired all the other patriots before he went crazy and gave a speech naked.
Here's a picture of the King's Chapel. The church had a hard time finding a home since none of the colonists really liked the King's Church. So that was the main reason why they left England. So they ended up building it on top of a piece of land whose occupants couldn't complain. The oldest graveyard in Boston.
This is the old City Hall, and it used to be Boston's Latin Academy.
There is a statue of Ben Franklin in front. He was the Academy's most famous dropout.
This is the Old South Meeting House. It was the biggest building in town that happened to be a church. The patriots would meet here and give speeches about demanding fair treatment from their motherland.
During the Revolution, the British took over the building and burned the pews to keep warm. They also used it as a stable to keep their horses dry and snug.
Here's Boston's oldest building, the Old Corner Bookstore. All the famous authors of the day would hang out here. Now all the not-so-famous authors are working here behind the counter.
This next building is the Old State House. The Declaration of Independence was actually read for the first time in Boston from that balcony. Many years later, it was read again here, and Queen Elizabeth sat and listened. Afterwards, we gave the Queen a check to pay for all the tea that the Patriots threw in the harbor.
In front of the State House is the location of the Boston Massacre, where many British soldiers fired their guns into a crowd of patriots and killed 5 of them.
Here is Faneuil Hall. It is the main marketplace at the edge of the wharf. We couldn't get inside because they were working on it while we were there, though.
We did see a cool car parked in the back.
The wooden building here is Paul Revere's home. We got to go inside and see what it was like to live in the 1700s. They used beds that had ropes to hold up the mattresses, which was made out of straw and straps of cloth. There was a fireplace in every room. It still was very cold in the winter.
Paul Revere was one of the writers who warned everyone that the regulars were coming. That was what they called the British soldiers.
Here is a statue of Paul on his horse and the Old North Church right behind it.
The Old North Church was the tallest building during the time, and Paul put out 2 lanterns right before his ride to let the people know that the British soldiers were coming by sea. We also went out of the city to Lexington and Concord, the towns where the first battles were fought during the Revolution. Here's Buckman's Tavern. This is where the Patriots stayed until the British soldiers arrived. It's right in front of the common where the first shots of war were fired. We got to see the kitchen and the bar where the Patriots drank ale and ate chowder. We also walked out into the Minuteman National Park, which is where the Patriots fought the regulars in the woods and chased them all the way back to Boston. we visited the USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned Navy vessel still in service.
We got to go below decks and see where they slept and worked the cannons.
The Constitution was nicknamed Old Ironsides because it never lost battle. No one could ever sink it. Back in Boston, we visited some of the neighborhoods in the city. Copley Square is more of a business district, but it is also the home of a beautiful church called St. Andrew's.
It sits right next to the tallest building in Boston, the John Hancock Center.
A block away or so is a shopping district on Newberry Street.
One evening, we walked through Chinatown on our way to have some Indian food.
We also walked down the old Irish pub row. Some of these pubs date back to the Revolutionary War.
As a matter of fact, George Washington used to frequent this establishment.
On our way to see Paul Revere's house in the Old North Church, we walked through Little Italy.
In our dad's favorite neighborhood in Boston, the waterfront. Well, it's really not a neighborhood unless you're a boat.
As you can tell, our dad likes boats.
One evening, we drove out of town into a small beach community just north of Boston, Winthrop.
The beach here wasn't all that different from the beaches in Seattle. There were lots of rocks.
During our travels throughout the city, we got familiar with Boston's subway system, the T. I call it also the train because that's what T stands for.
On the second week of our trip, we went to the Outer Banks in North Carolina.
The Outer Banks is a tiny strip of land that runs along the coast of the state. We stayed in a house right on the ocean.
There you go. I did.
We saw lots of these ghost crabs on the beach. They like to come out right after sunset, but you could also find them during the day if you kept your eyes open.
Hello. Captured.
One day we tried hang gliding.
Another day, we checked out the Kurtuk lighthouse. It's been operating since 1875, and it stands 162 feet above the ground. Boats from as far as 18 miles can see its light at night.
The same day, we visited a national seashore park that contains wild horses. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any that day, but we did find some dragonflies instead.
After our first flight in the hang gliders, we decided to visit the Wright Brothers Museum to find out more about their struggles to build a flying machine. It took the brothers 3 years and many failures to get it right. And we got to see the actual path that they flew after all their hard work.
Here are some more pics of our family.
all kids need mobile devices at dinner time.
Thanks for watching our show. Stay tuned for more episodes in the future. I'm Emily Spencer.
And I'm Natalie Spencer,
Bidding you farewell.